If you could go on your dream vacation, but afterward had to take a pill that made you lose all of your memories, would you still go? Almost every student I've asked this question, including me, has said no. And the reason is profound. Our memories of an experience matter just as much, if not more, than the experience itself. The vacation experience, whether for a few days or a week, is essential. But even more important is the decades for which you can reflect and share that memory with others. You experience an event once, but you remember it potentially thousands of times. Clearly, our memories are an integral part of what makes life worth living, which is why in this video, we're gonna take a deep dive into memory. We're gonna be discussing each of these topics. First, why should you improve your memory? How does memory work? The history of memory, 3 techniques to train your brain to remember anything, and finally, should we try and remember everything? Firstly, why should you even improve your memory? Fostering a greater memory can help you study more effectively in less time, learn more effectively by establishing a knowledge foundation of a topic, increase creativity, slow time down, memorize vocabulary for a language, memorize sentences, memorize speech topics for giving a speech. There are 3 things I want to hone in on from the benefits stated above. Firstly, memory in a field facilitates new learning. The more embedded knowledge we have for a given topic, the more associations new knowledge has to stick to. As a result, it's easier to educate ourselves when we have an initial network of facts to connect new information. Secondly, fostering a better memory can make us more creative. Creativity is an act of assemblage. Oftentimes, insights come from taking ideas from one industry, discipline, or area and transferring them to another. It comes from the mishmash of tons of ideas together, the assemblage of interconnected but disparate ideas. With this in mind, creativity is enhanced, not hurt, by having a fantastic memory. The more facts and ideas you have at your disposal, the better you'll be at coming up with new ideas. Fantastic memory enhances creativity. Thirdly, creating new memories stretches out psychological time and lengthens our perception of our lives. Contrary to the popular adage, time passes by more quickly when you're bored and more slowly when you're having fun. This is because we remember events in relation to other events. The more memories we lay down, the denser our network of association becomes to recall that memory, and the longer the event feels like it took reflecting on it. This is why the older you get, the faster time seems to pass. If that sounds dreary, you're in good luck. The memory techniques we're going to discuss later on are some of the most fun things you can do, especially in college. They will decrease the speeding up of time. Okay, why am I the one to tell you this? Well, I've read and integrated books such as Make It Stick, Moonwalking with Einstein, and consumed tens of hundreds of articles related to memory, and taken courses like the Magnetic Memory Methods class, as well as multiple studying master classes on Skillshare. And these insights have allowed me to cut my studying time in half at college, as well as quarter the time it takes me to memorize a speech for my speech sheet. And I've also learned these things recently, so I know what it feels like to be a beginner in the memory rabbit hole. And the best part? There's nothing special about me. Anyone can improve their memory drastically in as little as 1 day. We tend to talk about good memory as if it's a gift. That couldn't be further from the truth. Some of the best memories in the world exist in the memory champions of today. Memory champions compete in the World Memory Championships. Yep, you heard that right. There is a sport for remembering. They memorize things using ancient techniques used by the Australian Aboriginals for tens of thousands of years, and more recently, the ancient Greeks. These techniques include the Memory Palace Network for memorizing things in space, which serves as the foundation of all the different memory techniques, the Major System for memorizing numbers, and the Celebrity List for memorizing words and names. Using these techniques, memory champions can perform fantastical memory feats like remembering an entire deck of cards in around 30 seconds, memorizing tens of thousands digits of pi, and memorizing pages worth of poetry word for word. But we're going to teach you more than just memorizing blatant stuff. You're going to memorize to understand the world better. And now you're going to learn their secret. To understand how the memory champions remember things so well, we first have to learn how memory works through 2 main scopes: how our brain retrieves and memorizes information, and the types of memory. Memory at the most fundamental physiological level is a pattern of associations between neurons. As a drastic simplification, retrieving memory is as simple as a cue prompting the most closely associated memory to come up. For example, one of your classmates asks you about the worst professor you have ever had. This cue prompts a whole bunch of different memories to come up. These memories weren't lost to you. Instead, they were only brought up when your brain deemed it important. Evolution tends to minimize waste, which is why you don't hold every one of your memories in constant awareness at all times. That would make it impossible to respond to your environment proficiently, and it would cost way too much energy. To save space in memory, our brain memorizes things with a few tricks we need to be aware of to improve our memories. We remember surprising, vivid, vulgar things. We remember connected things, we remember spatial things, and we remember things in snapshots rather than through continuous videos. Firstly, we remember surprising, vivid, and vulgar things. This is mostly because uncertain situations are generally more likely to be dangerous, and our brain prioritizes them in memory. You can't die as easily from good things, especially if it's peanut butter, compared to bad things, like getting mauled by a hidden lion. And because uncertain things are generally more likely to be vulgar, vivid, and surprising, they're more memorable. Secondly, we remember connected things. To speed up recall, your brain associates information together. If a cue for one memory comes up, you're likely to remember things related to that memory. For example, suppose you focus on remembering the equation for photosynthesis. In that case, you're more likely to recall associated memories, like the equation for cellular respiration, images of plants, or that quiz that you failed in 6th grade biology. Maybe that was just me. Our brain is an associative network. Thirdly, we are incredibly good at remembering things in space. Humans evolved to have fantastic spatial navigation. When we were surviving in the African savanna, we had to differentiate in space where food, shelter, and other things were. These spatial memorization capacities have stayed with us to this day. Sitting and watching this video, I invite you to close your eyes and think about how good your imagination of your childhood home is right now. You can literally walk through it as if you were there. That's the power of spatial navigation. Fourthly, the brain remembers things in snapshots, usually during the peaks and the ends of an experience. The experience becomes a summary phrase, such as playing Minecraft was fun, or a small set of key features. Physics-defying lava castle, diamond find, or pig slaughtering. In effect, our memories of the past are our best broad, valuable summaries of the actual experience. When remembering these broad, valuable summaries, we recall the snapshots our brains stored and fabricate a narrative to fill in the sections in between. For example, our memory of going to the zoo becomes a summary. It was hot, and the pandas were awesome. Remembering this event years later, we might falsely believe the sun created heat waves and we got ice cream while watching the pandas. These are reasonable assumptions because we remember it was hot. In essence, our brain weaves together our memory snapshots to create a narrative when remembering. We don't remember everything about our lives, unless you're one of the most famous psychological patients ever. S. According to the New Yorker of 2017, S showed up at Moscow's Academy of Communist Education one April afternoon in 1929. It was soon discovered he had a condition called synesthesia, a rare perceptual disorder that causes the senses to become bizarrely intertwined. When S hears a number, he also sees colors and associated sounds. For example, he sees a mustached man for the number 7 alongside the color blue and a Russian accent. S serves as a perfect example to how memory works. He remembers virtually everything that has happened to him because everything creates a surprising, vivid, vulgar image connected through a sticky web of associations. Next, we need to understand the broad types of memory so we can discuss what we mean by improving our memories. The two main types of memory are procedural and declarative. Procedural memory is recall of how to do subconscious motor skill related things such as swimming or driving a car, and non-motor skills like skill learning and implicit associations like in classical conditioning. Declarative memory deals with memory of facts, episodes, and concepts. It's further divided into episodic and semantic memory. Episodic memory is our memory of events in episodes. Your memory of your birthday, for example. And semantic memory is our memory of words, numbers, and facts. For the rest of this video, I'm mainly going to focus on how we can improve our declarative memory because that's the most relevant to college. But your procedural memory can be improved using these techniques as well. Now, we can start diving into the fascinating history of memory. The reason we're traveling back in time is because all of the memory techniques and tricks I'll be elaborating on have been used by the ancients for tens of thousands of years. They've simply been lost today. To understand the history of memory, we're going to look at it through two lenses: our relationship with memory in the past and our relationship with memory now. Before the invention of writing, we communicated entirely orally. This meant entire cultural practices had to be passed down from generation to generation solely through memory. In effect, people needed incredible methods for fostering memory, and they did. According to researcher Lynn Kelly in her book, The Memory Code, many of our ancestors, like the Australian Aboriginals tens of thousands of years ago, used the landscape itself as a memory palace, a technique which involves using visualizations of real or fake locations with images inside that associate to what you want to remember. We're going to talk more about this extensively later. And for example, according to Kelly, the Australian Aboriginals would construct song lines as long as 800 kilometers to make their memories have visual, spatial, and audible associations inside of their memory palaces. Memory was incredibly prized in the days before writing, and the techniques they had to memorize emphasized this. Even with the invention of writing, the ancient Greeks and many other cultures continued to prize memory. In fact, to the ancient Greeks, intelligence was synonymous with memory. Their relationship with information was way different than it is now. Information in text was much scarcer than it is today. If you took a book out, you were encouraged to memorize it so you wouldn't have to take it out again. Because information in text was so scarce, they wrote the text themselves completely differently. According to Joshua Foer from Moonwalking with Einstein, in the time of Socrates, Greek texts were written on long, continuous scrolls, sometimes stretching up to 60 feet, pasted together from sheets of pressed papyrus reeds imported from the Nile Delta. These texts were cumbersome to read and even more cumbersome to write. They weren't written like books are today, with indexes, tables of content, or even spaces. They read like this. Yeah. As you can see, it is not very easy to read the written without spaces or punctuation of any kind, do even helpful position. I am struggling to read what is on screen right now. So you can see scrolls were not meant to be scanned. They existed not to hold content externally, but rather to help its readers navigate it internally. The assumption was you had memorized the text and therefore only needed it to bolster your recall. In effect, the quality of one's reading was seen as vastly more important than the quantity. This prizing of memory showed itself not only in the ancient Greek texts, but in their speeches as well. The phrase topic sentence comes from the Greek word topos, which means place. It's meant to signify how Greeks would use images in their memory palace to remember topics for speeches. In addition, the phrase in the first place, in the second place, etc., all come from the use of memory palaces to remember speech topics. Clearly, memory has been prized throughout history. It was essential to pass down knowledge from generation to generation when everything was oral. Even when writing was introduced to the world, the ancient Greeks and many other not mentioned cultures continued to see a good memory as a marker of character. Unfortunately, nowadays, memory is seen as something that some people naturally have better of, not as something that can or should be cultivated over time. The question is, why? The art of memory has died over recent years. The first major knock in the coffin for memory came with the invention of writing. Writing allows us to externalize our thoughts, effectively offloading the need to store that information in our first brain. Plato himself warned writing was an invention that will produce forgetfulness in the minds of those who learn to use it, because they will not practice their memory. Their trust in writing, produced by external characters which are no part of themselves, will discourage the use of their own memory within them. If Plato was ambivalent about note-taking in the 400s and 300s BCE, he would be shocked at the state of note-taking today. It's all because of one word: friction. For most of history, note-taking and reading was hard. Stone and wood were obnoxiously slow and difficult to carve notes in. In addition, many people weren't literate, meaning scribes, professions whose sole job was to take notes and read, were required. And as shown earlier, books weren't in abundance, and the books that were not easy to read. This created lots of friction in taking notes and reading. Today, the friction for taking notes and reading is practically non-existent. First, reading is way easier. Indexes have become more common, like with the Bible in the 13th century, and page numbers and tables of content became commonplace. Finally, the Gutenberg's printing press exploded the proliferation of written work in 1440. The notion of what it meant to be erudite evolved from possessing information to knowing where to find information. Quantity of reading is now prized over quality. Secondly, memorization isn't prioritized as it once was. Another devastating nail in the coffin came for memory in the late 19th and early 20th century when John Dewey, an educational reformist, stepped in and began making a case for a new kind of education that prized experiential learning methods over rote memorization. This movement is based on good intentions, but it was taken too far in some areas, leading to some to see rote memorization as a relic of the past. Over 100 years of progressive education, memorization in education has become discredited as oppressive and stultifying, a waste of time. Thirdly, note-taking is easier than ever before. We've gradually supplanted our own natural memory with a vast superstructure of external memory aids, a process that has sped up exponentially in recent years. When I wake up, I can get to exercise and writing confident nothing I need to do later in the day will fall through the cracks because it's on my to-do list in Habitica and Google Calendar. When I drive, bike, or walk somewhere new, I stick the location into Google Maps. I have photographs to store the images I want to remember, books to store knowledge, and now, thanks to large search engines and generative AI like ChatGPT, pretty much every easy to memorize fact is at my fingertips with a 5-second search. Much of this is incredible as it gives me room and consciousness to think about other things, but it does leave me and many others with a surprising lacking memory in some areas. There's little friction for everyone in note-taking. As a result, modern society is losing the art of memory formation we have known for so long. It's imperative that we rediscover the wisdom of the ancients, because when we lose our memories, we lose ourselves. So let's talk about 3 techniques to train your brain to remember anything. First, we're going to talk about the Memory Palace Network, which is the foundation of all the other techniques. Then we're going to talk about the major system for memorizing numbers. And finally, we'll talk about a celebrity list for helping you memorize words and names. I'm briefly going to go over what each of these is, an example of how they work, and give some outside resources on where you can learn more about each one. First, we have the Memory Palace, which is the foundation of all the other memory techniques. Memory Palace involves visualizing real or fake locations with images inside to assist in retrieving memories. The general idea is to take a place you know quite well, like the candy store in town. You know you frequented that place a lot, admit it. And place vivid images inside of them that represent the things you want to remember. Then, remembering becomes a simple act of walking through your memory palace in your mind's eye and recalling whatever you want to remember from the images throughout. For example, recently I've been doing a lot of impromptu speaking in speech and debate, which requires a lot of memorizing short anecdotes to exemplify points that I want to make in speeches. So I've made my childhood home into a memory palace by placing incredibly memorable images throughout that serve as cue reminders for the impromptu stories I want to tell. Take this impromptu story, for example. During the Three Kingdoms period, the general Ma Su was tasked with defending Jia Ting from an invading army led by the famous, clever, and intelligent general Zhuge Liang. Despite being warned by his advisors of the stupidity of the tactic, he decided to use the fake army strategy, in which he set up fake soldiers and a fake army tent. However, he failed to take into account that Zhuge Liang himself had used this strategy many times over his own battles during the Three Kingdoms era. So he was surprise attacked by Zhuge Liang and got entirely destroyed. This story shows the danger of ignoring outside feedback. This would take quite a long time to remember rotely, and even if I did, I likely wouldn't remember the story years later if I was prompted. But instead, I encapsulate this entire story in one image inside of a closet on the 3rd floor of my childhood home. The image has Goku with a Chinese beard, which is meant to remind me of Masu. Get it? Goku, Masu, being whispered to by 2 Chinese advisors. They're hiding behind a fake tent with fake shoulders, which reminds me of the fake army strategy. And finally, Zhuge Liang sounds like huge long. So I had an image of a super huge long Chinese general on a horse attacking Masu's encampment. And I've done this same thing for every one of my anecdotes and impromptu. All the images are located spatially throughout my home in recognizable places. So remembering them is simply an act of walking through the home in my head and seeing the images pop up. But you don't have to have just one memory palace. The true beauty of this technique comes with creating an interconnected network of memory palaces to allow for memorizing vast amounts of things. And if you want to learn how to build your first memory palace, I strongly recommend you check out the memory expert Anthony Metvier, because he is by far the best YouTuber, blogger, and course creator that I've found on memorization techniques. I have a link for him in the description. But it gets even cooler, because using your memory palace network and following the next 2 methods, you can memorize anecdotes, numbers, names, poetry, speech topics, and even entire books if you want. Firstly, let's explore the major system that allows you to remember numbers. The major system is a method for converting numbers into sounds, which you can then turn into memorable images you can place inside a memory palace. Essentially, the system works by converting numbers into consonants, as shown below, and then turning those consonants into words by adding vowels in between. Because none of the numbers are associated with a vowel noise, you can decode your images through analyzing which consonant sounds the word makes when speaking it out loud. For example, let's say you wanted to remember the number 12. 1 stands for the consonant D or T, and 2 for N. Which word has a T or D and ends with an N? Dino. And what's a recognizable image for the word dino? T-Rex. So to remember number 12, you would place a T-Rex inside of your memory palace. Now, if you want to remember a long set of numbers like your credit card, say 1127567849453145, don't worry, this is not my actual credit card number. All you have to do is convert each number couplet into an image and then place them in a memory palace in the order you want to remember them in. In this case, the T-Rex would be first, followed by more cool images. Isn't that so cool? Imagine remembering equations for STEM classes, your credit card number, or if you wanted to impress your friends, 100 digits of pi. And if you want to learn more about the major system, I once again recommend checking more about Anthony Metvier, who has even more articles on it. But it gets even better using the celebrity list, which is a prominent list of people in your life you create to use inside of the images in your memory palace. It works off the idea that celebrities are incredibly memorable, so using them in your image association makes sense. This is especially useful for memorizing names. Say you meet someone new named Dwayne Shunk. Normally you would hear the name, forget it in the next 5 seconds, and then die in embarrassment when you don't know the guy's name 3 days later. However, with a celebrity list, you can create an image of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Dwayne, dunking Shunk on a 500-foot tall basketball hoop while skydiving to make it more memorable. Then, the next time you see that person, your image of them comes back up and you can decode it to remember his name. The reason this technique is so powerful is because it works off the idea that the more personal your images, the easier they are to recall. And this is what Anthony Metvier, in his course, The Magnetic Memory Method, calls making your images magnetic. The reason he calls them magnetic is because, like a magnet, using personalized image to remember things helps you remember, stick the things you want to in your brain, whereas it repels, like a magnet, the things you don't want to remember. It is so much easier to go back through your memory palaces and have the images come back up when they are personal to you. So instead of using a typical T-Rex in the 12 example earlier with the major system, have your own personal T-Rex be used from a TV show you might have liked as a kid. Or like with the celebrity list, use your own personal people that are really memorable to you. They don't even have to be celebrities. They can be people that you really know well in your life. How should you get started using these techniques? You now know 3 of the most powerful memory techniques used by the ancients to remember things. You may be feeling overwhelmed. I was too at first, but I found the greatest piece of advice I ever got for learning the methods was to just get started. The only way to use the methods is to, well, use the methods. Perfectionism is the enemy of the good. Find a learning project associated with what you want to remember more deeply. Then try out creating one of the memory palaces with a couple of different images. Make your way from there. So, should we try to remember everything? The simple answer is no. These memory techniques are incredible for improving your memory for what you set your mind. However, despite their simplicity, they are mentally taxing to do. The use case for these memory techniques is not to remember everything you put your eyes on. It's to change your relationship with memory in the first place. Stop seeing memory as a relic from the past. Your memory makes up who you are. So don't remember everything that you come across, but consider improving your memory in the first principle of whatever areas you're interested in, like the history of writing, what a force is, etc. Because not only will it help your learning and creativity, but you'll also be able to come across as an arrogant prick whenever you recite a line from Shakespeare from memory. If you want to have a good life, be the kind of person who remembers to remember.